Hello everybody, my name is Alan, and welcome to another episode of Crimicide True Stories, the show where I take the best true scary stories on the internet and tell them to you guys. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to make another True Stories episode until after my Fresno Nightcrawler episode, but that got delayed, but the research is finished, I just need to write the script and record. But tonight's final story has something that the author can only describe as unexplainable. And with that, let's get into tonight's stories. This first story is from Reddit user Carlos K46. Katie was 21 and from Devon in the UK. She had always been very open to the supernatural and believed that there had to be some sort of life after death. The following is Katie's account of a paranormal experience she experienced while living in a house that was once an old mill. The house we were living in was called the Old Mill. My parents and I moved there when I was 14. It was a converted mill that still had a water wheel on the side. It didn't move, and it had been active for some time, along with all the cogs and workings on the wheel inside. It's been various different mills in its time. A sawmill, a paper mill, a flour mill. It was converted into a house in the 1950s, but the oldest parts of the house date back to the 12th century. I never really sensed anything when we first viewed the house. I just found the history of the building fascinating, and it was a beautiful house, so I was excited to move there. It was about 6 months after we moved that a man first appeared to me in my bedroom. I remember the first time I saw him. I thought someone had broken in. I remember screaming and yelling to my parents, "There's someone in the house!" But by the time they got there, he had vanished. We searched the house. Nothing. No signs of him. I was a bit freaked out for a while, and I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I saw him again about a week later, in the exact same spot in the corner of my bedroom. I remember I was home alone, and screaming, "What do you want?" At this point, I believed it was someone breaking in. I remember scrambling for my phone, ready to dial 999. But then, he spoke to me, and said, "I just want to be friends. I used to live here. I just want to visit and see what you've done with the place." So I asked him when did he live here, and that's when he said 1874. I thought he was kidding. But then I noticed his clothing, and it was very old-fashioned, very Victorian era. He wore a brown suit and held a top hat. I screamed again and ran out into the garden. Then, when I went back in, he was gone. I was so freaked. I didn't tell my parents because they would think I was out of my mind and seeing things. The next time he reappeared, he told me his name was Arthur. I always found it strange that he appeared in the exact same spot in the corner of my room. I also noticed he had a lot of bruising around his neck. I asked him about it once, but he looked very sheepish and then disappeared. He didn't look that old, maybe in his mid-40s? At the time, I was going through a rough spell with depression. He started appearing every time my head was in a dark place, and he started encouraging these negative thoughts and feelings. This is when I realized he wasn't just a spirit visiting somewhere he used to live. I felt he had caught on to the negative energy around me and encouraged it to make him stronger. This is when I told my parents. I think that they thought it was just voices in my head to do with my mental health. We sought medical help, but I felt that nobody took it seriously. That's when we decided we needed to move out of the house. The thing was, as soon as I left the house, it all stopped. He left me alone. The voices stopped. That's how I knew I wasn't simply going mad or having some sort of episode. When I told him we were moving, he was very angry and told me, "You're mine." That's when the figure of two girls appeared. Every time they appeared, he would disappear. They were about the same age as I was at the time, 15 or 16. One of them spoke to me. Her name was Mary, and she just said that I needed to leave, to get out, and to save myself from him. I believed her. There was even one time where Mary possessed me. I have no recollection of any of it, so I'll just tell you what my parents told me about it as they witnessed it. I was lying in my bed crying, and they were there comforting me. Apparently, my body went stiff for about 5 or 10 seconds, and then I started talking, but it wasn't my voice at all. I was saying, get out, you need to protect yourselves from him, save yourselves." And then I had a coughing fit and came back to myself. When my parents and I eventually moved out of the house, it felt like a breath of fresh air, like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders. Luckily, the sale of my parents' business meant we could buy and move into a new house before selling the old mill house. I'm very appreciative that we managed to do it because I was at the point that I just needed to get out of that house. When we moved into our new home, we got chatting to one of our neighbors, and it turned out he was a medium. We told him about all our experience with the old house, and he offered to go down there with one of his medium friends to see if they picked up on anything. Now, we didn't tell him all the details, but what he and his medium friend found out was amazing. Turns out Arthur was a priest who lived there in the 1870s. It turned out he had held 2 girls captive there, Mary and Elizabeth, and he accidentally killed them. He felt so guilty and ashamed of what he did that he ended up hanging himself in, you guessed it, the corner of what would become my bedroom. We managed to sell the house a year ago. We did tell the new owners that we had some spiritual activity, but we didn't tell them the full extent of it all. We didn't want to sell the house to a family who had any young girls, as we didn't want them experiencing anything similar to what I did. Luckily, it was a lovely elderly couple who bought it, and when we told them about it being slightly haunted, they thought it was rather splendid. I've now become very aware of the fact that I can sense spirits. Even in the home we live in, I sense my grandparents who passed away a few years ago. I wouldn't say I would never again live in a haunted house, because I feel all houses have history to them, even new builds, as there will be history to the land they're built on, just as long as the spirits are friendly and wish me no harm. This next story is from Reddit user Klaus_8743. Last night, I was walking home from my girlfriend's house. I passed some traffic lights, and to the right of the pavement I was walking on, I saw a woman just completely stopped. I assumed she was someone who wasn't local, about to ask for directions. So I took my headphones out, slowed down a bit, and smiled. It was dim, so I don't attribute this to anything weird, but it's what made me not stop. I couldn't make out any features at first. I was maybe 2 or 3 meters away from her. Bear in mind, she'd been in my view for about 20 seconds and hadn't moved at all. So I was a bit freaked out. I'm naturally a cautious person, so I was getting ready to go through some harrowing experience. I got a bit closer, and still couldn't make out her facial features. But it seemed like her face was distorted. Again, it wasn't, but it's what creeped me out, so I thought I'd mention it. When I got closer, I could see that her face was perfectly normal. This is where I assumed she wasn't local and about to ask for directions. But her face was emotionless. It had been over a minute of me being aware of her, where she still hadn't moved. I didn't stop because I felt creeped out. I just brushed it off, but I did go check about a minute later, and she still hadn't moved. I kept looking, and eventually she turned to her right, maybe fully around, I couldn't tell. It ran through my mind for the next few minutes, so I called my girlfriend because I'd be more comfortable that way. I got home fine, and I just assumed it must have been that illness where some parts of your body freeze. I can't remember what it was called, but I heard about it once. Last night I slept fine, and didn't think much of it, but I did think about it for a while. I just got back from a driving lesson as I'm writing this, and on that lesson I heard what made me think this was worth writing. I told my instructor of the eerie experience I had the night before. He lives in the area where I saw it, but early in the morning today he saw a woman. Blonde hair, expressionless as he said, but she was wearing a face mask at that point for some reason, likely could be a different person. She was hunched down, sat against a wall like a minute or 2 walk max from where I saw her, but she was breathing very heavily, and it creeped him out. Massive coincidence that we both saw it, if it was the same person, but creepy either way. I'm not sure if I'm glad I didn't say anything because something could have been going on. Either way, I'll never figure it out, and that could be a good thing for all I know. Needless to say, I've started taking the train home. Sorry for any spelling/grammar mistakes. Reddit was bugging out on my phone when I typed this, which made it pretty difficult to catch mistakes. This next story is from Reddit user Matthew the Deity. I have a good amount of stories that I could post here, since I've had a few strange and weird experiences throughout my life, despite only being 19 years old. But I don't think I'll ever forget this experience despite even convincing myself that this was me possibly having a fever or a very realistic dream, even if the experience felt very, very real. Truthfully, I don't fully believe that this had really happened, but I could be wrong. That's up to you to decide. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I lived in a small house with my mom and my stepfather and stepsister at the time. I had an irrationally strong fear of the dark, and since my stepfather was quite cruel towards me, they liked to keep me paranoid and took away my opportunity to sleep easily by taking away my TV, which was the only thing that helped me sleep. My mom agreed since she wanted me to get past my fear of the dark, but I digress. One night, I remember being extra paranoid and scared, so I slept in my sister's room since she had a convenient bunk bed that I could sleep in sometimes. I slept in the top bunk that night and tried sleeping, but alas, I was too paranoid even then. It was the middle of the night. If I had to guess what the time was, then I'd say it was probably about 1 a.m. on a school night. I tried distracting myself most of the time until I passed out when I was younger, so I tried the same thing that night. I remember seeing a strange light illuminating from the blinds, and I immediately took interest. I thought it was a car at that moment, but I was scared of it being possibly a stranger trying to stalk up. Since my stepsister was in the room, I managed to pull myself together enough to peek through the blinds and see, not a stranger, and definitely not a car, but a strange flying saucer that flew nearby my house and above the house across the street. I remember my eyes widening as I looked around more and saw another flying saucer not too far away from it, slowly floating to the right of my house and in the corner of my eye. I remember seeing some large craft hover right above my house. I looked up completely and saw this mammoth of a saucer float over and above my house completely. I couldn't even see it once it moved more, but I remember it having almost a stereotypical light on the bottom of the ship, but a strange, darker color to the whole thing. One of the smaller ships followed it, and I remember being too scared to run in my mom's room, in fear that it would make the saucers aware of my presence, or possibly provoke the ship into taking me and my family away, so they wouldn't be discovered. So I slowly and hesitantly moved towards the living room to look outside the window and see if it was still around, since it floated in that direction, and it was gone. But our trash can outside had fell over, and the sound of distant barking echoes throughout the night. I didn't know what to say or how to feel once it was over. I couldn't tell, even then, if I had hallucinated it or if I was dreaming it. But I was definitely left speechless at that moment, and I knew that if I had told my mother that, she'd just laugh and say, "Oh, it was just your imagination." I hadn't told anybody this story before until now, since I can't sleep and it's 6:30 a.m. Despite how real it felt at that moment and how clearly I remember it, I still can't bring myself to fully believe that happened because of its slightly stereotypical look. But remembering the event so clearly, despite barely thinking about it for a few years, has left me scratching my head again, since if that was a dream, how come I didn't remember any other dreams from when I was a kid? This really is up to Reddit and the people reading the story to guess whether this happened or not. If you've made it this far in the video, that means you probably like my stories. If you really enjoyed them, go ahead and comment, like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you want to be updated on when I release new videos. I don't just do stories, I also do true crime videos, and just any kind of mystery I like to solve, really. And with that, let's get into the final story. This final story is from Reddit user Panel Freak. Okay, so I used to live in a small town in rural Canada. There was this old folks' home for the mentally unwell that was closed a long time before I moved there. During the day, people would go on the property and hang out in the well-kept grass and trees. The town still took care of the surrounding grounds for this specific reason. The actual building was locked up, but teenagers would break into the building to basically scare themselves, myself included on a few occasions. Usually with 5 or so people, a little drunk or a bit high, but even stone cold sober, it was lots of fun. And literally nothing actually happened that couldn't be easily explained with logic. Noises, papers shifting, etc. Inevitably, the large group of teenagers that we were would make too much noise and the cops would get called. One night, me and my best friend, whom is seriously skeptic, decided to break/get into a part of the building we knew hadn't been gotten into before. This time, just the 2 of us, because the more people you bring, the more likely the police are to show up due to a disturbance being called by someone living across from the property. We've had to book it from the cops before, and we didn't want to tonight, especially if we were going to a place that no one had been to before where we didn't know the exits. To get an idea of what it looks like, 5 stories tall, with the 4th and 5th stories making a slightly lower jutting out of the middle. Old bricks in the front, modern cement blocks that were painted over, like in the schools, at the back, where you could tell stuff was added in later years. The newer parts of the building had been broken into by kids a lot, but the main building had thick metal doors and the windows that might be able to be opened on the 3rd story. Looked like an old school or church or asylum all got cobbled together. There were other little structures around the main building, pool house, gymnasium, all ransacked by us idiot kids. Not the main floor of the old building though. We climbed on the roof of the boiler room at the back of the building by piling up furniture debris we found in one of the ransacked storage buildings behind the main building. We pulled off one of the plywood covers nailed over a hole in the roof that led into the boiler room and used the pipes along the ceiling and walls to climb down. This part of the building was still semi-modern, and you could tell it was added closer to when it was closed. There was an exit that only opened from the inside, so at least leaving would be easy if needed. Me and my buddy are pumped at this point. The pipes made it easy to get down, and everything was going good. We made our way to the back of the room and found the door leading to the untouched main floor of the building. We're half expecting the door to be locked like all the other middle ones, but I opened with an achy creak. The door opened to the middle of a hallway leading left or right. The first thing we noticed, dust everywhere. It made a 1/4-inch film on everything. We both went right as it led into an interesting looking main area with sheet covered furniture. We used our phone screens as lights and took a couple steps into the main room, and it hit me like a train. I'll try my best to phrase this understandably. All of a sudden, I felt sick. Not throwing up sick, but I'm going to die sick. Like my brain said, run, leave, escape, now. I started shaking for no reason. It was so jarring. If I had to compare it to something, it felt like someone was right behind me with the intent to end me. It was weird because of how sudden it was, like a switch went off. I was excited and positive right up until the point where I was convinced we were about to get jumped or murdered. I looked at my buddy, and his face had the same expression of what I felt. Genuinely terrified, white as a ghost. I think that might have scared me even more, honestly, because I've never seen him like that. Remember, neither of us saw anything at this point. No ghosts, no distinct noises after the door creak, no creepy dolls or skeletons, just thick dust and sheet-covered furniture. It made no sense that I felt so threatened, and looking at my friend, I knew he felt it too. Without saying a word to each other, we turned on our heels and walked towards the boiler room. We didn't tell each other that either of us wanted to go. We just started backtracking faster than we came in. I'm leading us at this point, and my blood ran ice cold when I noticed something on the other side of the door we left open. A set of fresh-looking footprints that led down the left route of the hall. We both went right to get to the large main room. The prints were positively not ours. As we got closer, it got worse. Those footprints started 8 to 10 feet from the door, in the middle of the hall. It looked like a person teleported 10 feet from the door mid-stride and walked the opposite way and around the corner. We booked out of there as fast as possible. Thank fuck there was an exit in the boiler room, because I can't imagine climbing up those pipes in that panic. Literally never went back to that building. I asked my buddy what he saw on the way back to his house, and he said he saw the prints, and noticed how far they were from the door, so I know I wasn't seeing things. I'm an atheist. I don't have a good explanation for this, and I'd really love one. To clarify, we didn't see them appear, we saw them after they had been made, and they looked as new as ours. Bonus fact, the tower had a window at the top, and some people claim that they could see someone standing in it at night sometimes. There was a couple of times when I swear something looked like it could be in the window, but it could easily just be my mind playing tricks on me. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed these stories. I know I did. If you really liked them, go ahead and comment, like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Again, I don't just do stories. I do a lot of true crime and other mysteries that I just really love tackling to solve. I'm uploading another video on the Fresno Nightcrawler soon, and I think I've solved it, so stay tuned for that. Other than that, I'm going to try and get back into at least a semi-normal schedule. It's been way too long since I uploaded, and I'm going to correct that. If you guys want if you guys have a mystery for me to tackle, go ahead and comment it down below, and I'll see about it, because after the Fresno Nightcrawlers, I don't know what I'm going to tackle next, to be honest. I want to get Familia Andromeda, but I just feel like there's not enough clues out there quite yet. But with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.